Good morning, everyone. I This is a bad sack. It's gooey, and no wonder it didn't hold any ink. Bad sack. Yesterday, I went out sketching with the Urban Sketchers, and it was 90 degrees. Luckily, not in the shade, but stupidly, I was in the sun for an hour and just dealing with that trauma of sunlight hitting me square in the bald spot. Anyway, I tried to draw, and I was using paper that had this paper that has sort of a sheen to it. Little shiny bits are part of the paper pulp, and the ink dried really, really fast. So I wasn't really able to do some of what I thought I was going to be able to do. So sometimes our plans are thwarted by things like temperature. Anyway, and sometimes they're thwarted by things like 90 degrees. That's already added. That's what the temperature meant. Progressives. I go to something else. Sometimes they're thwarted by, I had in my mind, I thought we were going to be slightly further northward, and there are more interesting buildings to focus on. And I had a thought of drawing what I did, but we were sort of, the Greenway, the Rose Kennedy Greenway, is this where it follows the tracks of what used to be the elevated highway through Boston. So it's this narrow, well, pretty big actually, but anyway, this piece of land that has roads on either side, which are still somewhat traveled, and then there are buildings. And these buildings were built many of the buildings were built when this thing had an elevated road on it. So they weren't really meant to be very pretty on the street level because you couldn't see them. I don't think. So they're rather ugly buildings in part of the area where we were. And up here in this area, there were funny little side streets that went in and back, and where we ended up, I thought we would be here, but we were down here. And this area has a big Federal Reserve Bank, which is uninteresting in my mind. And we had a fire station here, which is just uninteresting buildings here. And then over here was South Station, which actually was interesting, but the light was sort of not helping because the sun was over here somewhere. So this is the curved facade with the carved eagle and clock and ionic columns were not really lit very interestingly. So, and then meanwhile, the sun was causing the temperature to be way up here at the top and causing my energy level to go way down. So, what did I learn in all of this? I'm not really sure what I learned. I did bring 2 pens to loan to 2 artists who were sort of interested to try out vintage pens, and they were both very, very pleased at getting some pens to try out. And they were both Eversharp Skyline pens with flexible nibs. And one of the 2, who was a woman, so the woman was just delighting in sketching really, really lightly and then pressing on the gas. And so her hand was barely touching the paper. And the man version of the two artists that were looking at the pens, the male, this isn't necessarily implying sexist attributes, sexual attributes to these two people, but he tends to draw very broadly. So I think his line work will probably have the pen broader in how he draws than how she draws. He draws in a very graphic style, like a comic book artist. In fact, that's what he does do sometimes. And so the line work he makes is very heavy for the most part. He's also a left-handed person, but he doesn't draw with a hook, so I don't know why I'm mentioning he's left-handed. Again, this will eventually, hello, effects this will eventually lead to the conversation I want to have in a minute, but I just thought I'd start with what happened yesterday. So she was using the pen from its finest, just actually lifting up almost on the pen on the page to get a really delicate line out of it, and then applying the gas sparingly to get the lines that she would use to sort of suggest weight or shadow on her drawings. The guy, on the other hand, sort of was immediately drawing his line work with the full brunt of the gas being pressed on the pedal. And I have a feeling that they're not going to change their drawing style because of a pen. I think they're going to continue to want to draw the way they draw. But it was a realization to me, I think, that expecting an artist or a calligrapher or writer to necessarily change what they do immediately is probably not going to happen. Or maybe it will never happen. They'll never change their style. They're going to draw the way they draw, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. What I am going to do to them, however, when I see them next week, is I'm going to also provide them with 2 or 3 other pens that they can borrow over the summer. And one will be very, very fine and not flexible for each of them. So maybe they'll change their drawing style because they have a different tool in their hand, which might be interesting to see if that works. They are my guinea pigs, essentially. I'm trying an experiment with them. And, excuse me, I think that they both, one of them brought her tool. She was a watercolor person as well. She brought her, a rolled up thing full of brushes, and she had, 10 different brushes for doing 10 different things. So I have a feeling that she understands that the different tools she uses for different effects, that maybe one pen will not do everything she wants. I have a feeling too that the guy has his, I know most of the drawings that I've seen him do look like they are similar in the sense of their pen work He has one of those Fuda pens, which you get thick and thin based on the angle that the pen is to the paper rather than the pressure on the nib. So I'll be with you in a second, Effects Technol. I just wanted to get through this thing. So part of the learning curve with these people who have never really used a flexible nibbed pen that flows well. They know how to use them, the dip ones, but they don't like to dip. So I thought, well, this is a new thing for them. They're able to, maybe sketch faster, sketch longer. We'll see what it's like. We'll see how they go, and we'll see if maybe their drawing styles will change. Maybe they'll just be able to draw more drawings in a quicker amount of time because they don't have to dip. Who knows what's going to happen? The jury's out. Tune in next time for the exciting conclusion. I'm eager to see what they say about their pens. So I'm presently working on a pen for a customer to be who saw some calligraphy or some handwriting, calligraphic handwriting. I'm not sure it's calligraphy or calligraphic handwriting. I don't know because I didn't see the person write with it. But they were using a flexible nibbed pen, which, sort of had this range. The thin lines were kind of thick. The thick lines were thicker, but there wasn't, maybe the thick lines were maybe that thick. So there was a difference between the two, and it was a pretty sweet difference. It would make me happy to have a pen that does that. Anyway, the person said, where can I find a pen that can do that? And I typed in, I have one, I might have one, or whatever. And then all of these people that have bought pens for me said how nice I am and how, they couldn't find, the experience of buying a pen from Peer is worth every penny, or, whatever they said. They read from whatever script I sent them. So I know that they were unscripted, what's the word when you ask for a compliment? They were unscripted and unexpected, but I got a lot of people saying, how they really appreciated the selection of pens I have, and also the way that I was able to figure out what kind of pen they wanted, that the person wanted. So back to the guy that I said, send me an email and we'll talk. So we stopped talking on a public forum because I didn't know, if he wanted his business made completely public, and how much he was willing to spend, and all this other kind of stuff that some people don't like to broadcast to the entire world. Unsolicited, thank you. So anyway, I said I had a pen like that can do this, and he wrote me back saying, I'm the one from the Facebook group, and I want a pen that goes from extra fine to BBBB, from XFFF to BBBBB. And this is after I said I had pens like that. And I do have pens like that can go from XXX to BBBBB as well. But those are the ones I want to keep. Those are the ones I use. I do sell them occasionally, but I want to make sure that the person that's going to handle the Ferrari knows how to drive a Ferrari and will use it in all of its Ferrari-dumness. You know, if you write or want to do a certain kind of calligraphy, the Ferrari is not the kind of pen you want. You want a different kind of pen. And so anyway, I asked him to send an image of what he presently writes like, and he sent me a very nice photograph of his name and my name. And it seemed like whatever pen he was using was pretty darn close to this, the one that he wanted. It might have been just a tiny bit thinner on the thickest point. But the thins were not any thinner than this one. But he also, in the text of his letter, he implied that he didn't want it to be thinner. So I'm a little confused as to what he wants. But I did see, based on what he did send me, that his writing style is one that well, I'll just explain how it works. He creates each letter, and this is a perfectly legitimate way to make calligraphy. Each cursive letter he'll draw one at a time. 1, B, C, D, E. And there's nothing wrong with this. This is a perfectly legitimate way to draw a letter, to make letters. It's what I have to do almost when I'm using metallic inks or white ink, which is essentially paint on paper. But when I try, and I've tried for dozens of years to make thin lines, when I'm drawing slowly, I really have a hard time making them thin. When I make a line thin using speed, why is this pen skipping? I'm down to just the dregs of ink here, and I have so little ink, and what I have is so bad. But what I need in order to make this line as thin as it is, which is part of what makes it, quote, calligraphy or, quote, beautiful, is I have to draw it fast, and or I have to draw it big. You know, it's really, really hard for me to go from 0 to 60, back to 0, and then back to 60, and back to 0 in this amount of space. I can do it on, this amount of space, 0, 60, 0, 60, except it's not supposed to skip like that. This ink that is in it is really gummy. Let's see if I can just dump out some of it or fill it with something else. It's just better ink. There's so many inks I have that some of the inks are quite old. Like, I can smell what this ink is. This is Carter Midnight Blue Black, which is ink is older than I am, and I have quart bottles of the damn stuff, and it's very watery, but it's perfectly fine for what I do here, which is just test out nibs all day long. And sometimes I do drawings with. Sometimes I want it to look like that. Sometimes it's part of the thing. This pen is still kind of skipping, but I maybe needs to really get cleaned out because I've been putting so many different inks in it. So for me, so anyway, with this guy, I have to sort of completely shift my gears because I now have to think of how he's going. Oops, why is it doing that? I have to think of how he's writing and the speed at which he writes. What I did ask him to do is provide to me an image of what he aspires to do, calligraphically speaking. And because he did talk about his thin lines being shaky. And that's another thing that happens when you go slow. When you move your entire arm and you move it at speed, the line is going to be smoother. When you write really, really small and you write slowly, it's going to vary more easily. You might learn to make it not do that, but that is sort of what it is more tends to do more. So, you know, a pen for this guy, you know, I'm not really sure what he wants. I don't quite know. And I know what he says he wants. I'll put it this way. I don't even know what he says he wants because he's kind of changed his mind a little bit. But I know what he says he wants. I'm not entirely sure that if I had right here in my hands exactly the pen that he wants in my hand, whether he will, with the writing style and the speed, I don't know whether it's possible to do what he wants it to do exactly with the way that he's writing. And I'm not dissing the way he's writing at all. It's a perfectly legitimate way of making your letters. But there might be a way for me to help him get what he wants by maybe giving an exercise or two of how to speed up your writing without making it bigger. I don't know what that exercise is, but there might be an exercise. And it might be, how do you do that though? How do you go fast and do one letter at a time? So I don't know. I'm a little bit yeah. The Ferrari can go to the grocery store, but it's not going to get to the grocery store really any faster. You know, they'll still have the milk you need for your recipe. You know, if you're trying to win a race, the station wagon won't do it. But if you're just going to the grocery store in stop and go traffic, a station wagon will be perfectly fine. I do see people, when I hand them a Ferrari or a pen that has a really fine, and they write really slow, and they say, well, how can I make my lines as thin as yours? Well, you have to go fast, and you have to lift up on the pen. You have to do things that are very unnatural to you. And it's just, you have to recalibrate your brain and your hand a little bit. It's more about that than the right pen, maybe. I think if I had the pen he had, I could probably get finer lines out of it by just writing faster and bigger. This is really bad ink. I'm just going to remove this right now. I need to actually get my fat ass to a store that has ink, and I need to just throw out every single bottle of shitty ink I've got here, and I've got lots of it. I think this bottle of, well, see, this red ink, burgundy red, has already been sort of, what's the word I want? Contaminated by other, yeah, it's okay. It's a little better. Sometimes when you mix inks or don't flush out a pen well enough, you're going to get a little bit of Parker ink left in the pen when you put Schaefer ink in it, and the little recipes don't always mix well together, and it'll skip and explode and coagulate and do all sorts of nasty things. So yeah, the wet noodle, to use a wet noodle, I don't like wet noodles. I like al dente noodles. I like them to be a little, I like dip, I like flexible pens to fight back a little bit. When they're too pliant, I have a really hard time making them work, because they splay too easily. I want to work at making them thick. So, this is a very fine. This might be sort of the pen he wants. And this is a Victorian era dip pen nib set in a fountain pen, so I have to dip it all the time. I can fill it, but I want to make sure that it'll work. So maybe what he wants is a Frankenpen kind of a thing. And they can be expensive because I like them. I don't want to sell them, but everything has a price these days. But they also take time for me to cobble together, because I have to essentially take 3 pens and take the parts of 3 pens and put them together. And the most important part of the pen is a nib, and a Victorian dip pen nib are not as easy to come by as a Waterman number 2. Yeah, resistance is futile. Resistance is really what I love in a pen. Now I have sloppy. Here are these my sloppies? Sloppy. I have a whole drawer full of sloppy, but because of things getting mixed up, they may not be as sloppy as, or who knows what they are. But this nib here, I think, is sloppy. Yes, it's very sloppy. This nib, if I had that nib I just had in my hand and this nib together, and I showed it to someone at a pen show, they may choose this nib because it seems to get it seems like you don't need any pressure to make it get thick. It happens really, really easily. And you think, oh God, I want that. I want it that nib because it splays so fast. But what happens is it's harder to control. It just, if you have a car, your Ferrari, that goes from 0 to 60 in 1 second, you're going to get in lots of accidents. If you have one that goes from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, you'll have 2 seconds to change your mind before you run into that truck in front of you. Or if you have to apply lots of pressure to make it go to the 60, you'll learn that you'll learn how to press your foot better than if it was really loose. There's still a gradation of foot pressure, but if the gradation is only this much rather than this much, it's gonna be hard. So this nib, even though it's very seductive in its ability to get fat, seductive, that's not what I want. It's sloppy. It's very weak-willed. And you don't want that. You want to work at it. This isn't meant to be easy. Now, why this one feels like it's not sloppy? Boy, that's a nice nib. It is sloppy in a way, but there's a little sharper feedback. I do have taperites for you, Effects Technol. And I know one of the things I want to do before I go to Minneapolis in a week is to both select a bunch of pens that I can bring with me that I want to sell, as well as conduct some business before I go. So I'll look at those blue pens maybe later today, and I'll look at other people's wish lists that I have to see if I can. Yeah, the car ones work really well when describing. Well, when describing so much of how the nib writes and the speed and the quickness of braking and acceleration and all that kind of stuff, it's really a good analogy. And it's also, we have such great knowledge of cars, maybe not driving Ferraris, but we know that people that have Ferraris tend to have them for a particular reason, and they know how to drive. And we know what it's like being in a car where someone doesn't know how to shift gears very easily and grinds gears. And there's a friend of mine who, it was just, I felt I needed a neck massage every time I got out of his car and kissed the ground. He's one of these people who, there's a stoplight here, and he wants to be the very first one in line at the stoplight. So he's traveling along, so, within the speed limit, and actually kind of slowly, slowly going, and the cars are maybe going ahead of him, and then he sees the light turning red, and suddenly he puts on the gas to be first in line to stop. So there's this constant, acceleration, deceleration, rather than just sort of this line, it was, this jerky thing. And you do see, that sort of, we know what that person is like, and we know how uncomfortable that is. So I don't know what how this analogy works. Is this kind of writing, like you do one letter at a time? That might be kind of it, but it's not. I don't think that's perfect. But anyway, we know whether we drive cars or we're passengers in cars, which sometimes, which almost all the time is worse than being a driver. The driver knows when he's going to do that. The passenger doesn't always know that he's going to step on the gas. So it's always a surprise for you. Well, there are 3 people, and there were as many as 5. So I don't know what else is here. I need to sign off. What I'm going to do is send this video to this guy and have him watch it. I've invited him to come on as a guest or as a commentator, so I can maybe understand a little bit more about what he is wanting and how I can help him. I don't know where he's from. He might be sound asleep in Australia for all I know. So I want to have him wide awake and able to type and stuff. I did have a fun time with Briar. Was it yesterday? 2 days ago, when Briar Bear drove up from New York, and ended up buying some pens from me. But we had a really nice time back face to face, and I was able to. He wrote very interestingly. He could write small like this, and relatively slowly and relatively carefully. He wrote this size, and he sort of printed, so there was a lot of start and stopping going on, and then he would test out a pen by doing something like that, and it wasn't quite his signature. I don't know what he was writing. I should have asked him, but he wrote very fast some of the time, and then when he actually wrote, he wrote rather also. It was sort of this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde pairing of writing, and it was kind of difficult to know what kind of pen to let him have to try out, because it was just hard to know because of the 2 completely different styles. But he also wanted a pen also to draw with, and it looked like he draws very carefully, not sketchy, but carefully. So that was interesting to see how that worked. Yeah, the Jekyll and Hyde, people do that. Anyone that does calligraphy and does regular handwriting, calligraphy is for other people to read. Handwriting is for you to read, or sometimes for you to just get off your chest. If you're a journal keeper and just want to put words down, you don't really necessarily want to reread them, but as part of your understanding of the world around you and what happened yesterday and what the trauma that you're experienced. If the important thing is just to to turn them into words, and then as you're doing that, understand what happened to you. That's one way of journaling, where they're never really meant to be reread. I can't read my own handwriting. I have a hard time. When I'm a calligrapher, I have to make it readable by the mailman, at least. So, but there is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde wrote in two different ways too. Mr. Hyde would say, if he wanted someone, his next victim, to, remember to feed the cat, he'll write it so he or she could read it. Please feed cat. And then he goes back, must kill damn woman and cat. That's, Lo Schiavello, where when he's Dr. Jekyll, don't let's. Now, how does that work? Do and don't. Do, comma, don't let's, meaning don't you. Don't let's forget to feed the puss. And then in his diary, that silly maid doesn't even know how to read, let alone read my carefully composed calligraphic note to her. Why did I pen such a thing? And then as he's doing that, he turns into Mr. Hyde. We were wondering how you were just the other day. We missed your visits. I think in addition to missing your visits, we also missed getting into the gutter, because part of the fun of getting in the gutter was to watch you have a aneurysm. So well, I know that you stalk often, but I want to sometimes I know you have pithy insights, and when we are talking about you, wondering about you, sending a thumbs up icon and not, saying I'm too sleepy to actually type, but I'll give you this thumbs up. Anyway, what I want to do with right now is to send the link to this video to the guy that I later want to have come on. So I'm going to hang up now, and because I'm on now a borrowed time between now and the time I have to leave. I do have a lot of shit I have to do, but part of the shit I have to do is also sit here and sort of decompress and make fish and get in the gutter with you guys too, but I just can't do it right this very second. So, Schiavello, we'll talk to you later. Whoever you else are, we'll talk to you later. Effects Technol, I'll put the blue pens you want in a little pile where I won't forget them, and I'll put a Waterman taper right in there as well, knowing that you want one, just as a note. May not. Waterman tape rights come with various different caps. Is that important to you? Uh, and you can text me that. So we'll talk later. See you later. You like the yellow ones. Okay. Thank you. Bye.